If you think Jesus would have been left-wing or right-wing, then you have completely missed his point. Jesus was anti-establishment. Both the right and the left wings are establishment-based positions.
Okay, I think I see the problem here. You seem to be conflating the radical left with progressive social politics, but they're not the same thing. Now, I might argue that to be a consistent leftist, you should also have progressive values, but you absolutely cannot reduce the radical left to just another set of policy positions. That is a gross oversimplification. When we're talking about the radical left, we're not talking about the liberal left, and that is a very important distinction. This isn't just about different policy platforms within the system, it's about transforming and even overthrowing the existing economic and social order. So to say, as you do, that Jesus was anti-establishment and therefore wouldn't be left-wing because that's an establishment-based position, I don't think you know what that means. But here's a caveat. It's very important to acknowledge that Jesus lived in a specific time and place. And so, as I've said many times before, when I say Jesus is a radical leftist, of course, I'm not actually saying he would fit neatly into any modern ideology. There absolutely would be individual issues where, from our perspective, he might seem more progressive or more conservative. But that's hardly the point. The question isn't whether Jesus would align with every modern leftist position, not even modern leftists do that. It's whether the overall thrust of his mission aligns with radical leftist principles. And the answer to that is yes. To understand why, though, we need to actually better understand what the radical left is, if it isn't to be equated with the liberal left. But we're immediately met with a bit of a problem, because the radical left isn't a single ideology, but a broad movement made up of different but overlapping traditions. At its core, the modern left has been shaped by two great schools of thought, Marxism and anarchism. Both are committed to dismantling capitalism and class exploitation, but they approach these struggles in different ways. Marxism emphasises historical materialism, class struggle, and varying takes on the necessity for a revolutionary seizure of state power. Anarchism, whilst also deeply concerned with class struggle, places a stronger emphasis on dismantling hierarchy in all its forms, advocating for decentralised organisation and direct action. These traditions have often influenced one another and, at times, worked together in revolutionary moments, but they've also had deep and bloody disagreements, from tactical disputes to fundamental ideological conflicts over the state, authority, and the organisation of society. As I said at the start, though, this is not just about tweaking policies. In fact, a good way to think about it is to note the centrality of economics. Politics flows from economics. The economics comes first. That's true pretty universally. But for those on the radical left, this means the complete dismantling of the capitalist system, and I need you to understand just what a radical change that would be. We're talking about upending centuries of entrenched power, a society where speculation and profit no longer dictate economic life, where wage labour is considered an outdated and absurd concept, where resources are allocated first on need. So again, and I really can't stress this enough, not an establishment-based position, but definitely one that's possible if we're willing to learn from the breadth of human history and experience, whether that be from the Zapatistas, Rojava, Revolutionary Catalonia, or indeed the Church in Acts. Talking of which, Christians have also engaged with these ideas for as long as they've been about to engage with, because they recognise their resonance with biblical calls for justice and liberation. In comparatively more recent times, this has looked like liberation theology, which draws considerably from Marxist thought and brings it into dialogue with the Bible, which is also something we see Jesus doing all the time in the Gospels. Okay, obviously not with Marxism specifically, because again, Marxism is a modern school of thought, but absolutely with questions around money, labour, power, poverty. And as a quick aside, note two things that are not on that list: homosexuality and, as you put it, dead babies, by which I assume you mean abortion. The Bible is categorically not, as you say, very clear on these issues. Jesus never condemned same-sex relationships, and the passages often cited to do so are far from clear-cut condemnations, especially when understood in their historical and cultural contexts. The Bible also never prohibits abortion, nor, lest you think I'm showing undue bias here, is Numbers chapter 5 verses 11 to 31 an endorsement of it. It simply never mentions it. You are right, though, about Jesus' concern for the poor, loving one another, and serving your neighbour. But he doesn't talk about these things in some kind of individualistic isolation. You have to recognise that his context is one of empire. It's one of farming and agriculture. It's one of Second Temple Judaism. All of these things and more go into who Jesus is and what he taught. And it's not good enough to just say, well, those are the ways of man and the ways of man are evil. It's not that simple. If it was, he wouldn't bother talking about the rich or the religious hierarchy or the temple economic system. But he did talk about those things, and he proposed something radically different in the kingdom of God. And what did that look like? It looked like the poor being lifted up and the powerful being brought down. So let's talk about the kingdom of God and how it relates to the world, because I can already hear the objection of John 18:36, "My kingdom is not of this world." And you can find that in the vast majority of English translations. But the NRSV, which is the academic standard when studying the Bible in English, has a different translation. It says, "My kingdom is not from this world." Why? Okay, the Greek for this is he basileia he eme uk estin ek tu kosmou tutu. And the word we're interested in here is that little word in the middle, ek. That's the one that's usually translated of, but the NRSV translates from. Now, ek is a preposition. It shows a relation between one word or clause in a sentence and another. The book is on the table. He sat in the car. She walked through the park. But ek is a preposition that indicates origin. Now think about it. There are some cases where the English word of can indicate origin. Joan of Arc, Thomas of Canterbury, the people of Cuba. So it's not wrong to translate ek to of, but it is confusing because of doesn't usually indicate origin. There's a much better word for that, from. But a kingdom not from this world is very different to a kingdom not of this world. It no longer suggests a kingdom that refuses to engage or that can't be seen to align generally with a political wing, such as it may be, but a kingdom that's deeply engaged in the world. And yes, you're right, some of that means to be different, to be in opposition to what the world considers normal. But what do you think that means other than the rejection of oppressive power structures and the embrace of radical justice and hospitality? As we've seen, the radical left is not an establishment position and is not what the world considers normal. Ironically, the Jesus you present fits into that category rather well. But Jesus wasn't neutral, as if such a thing can even exist, and he wasn't a centrist. He didn't balance between empire and resistance, or between the rich and the poor. He overturned the tables in the temple, he condemned the wealthy, he uplifted the poor, and he directly challenged the political and religious elite to the point of execution in a manner reserved for political dissidents. And that, by the way, is how the early church received Jesus' message. It wasn't Marx who first said, "From each according to their ability, to each according to their need." It was the Church of Acts. So the idea that Jesus is neither left nor right, or that he's somehow above politics, is itself a political move, and one that always ends up reinforcing whoever already has power. And that is the way ideology is functioning in your argument. It's functioning to uphold the status quo. So if you want to take Jesus' teaching seriously, as I'm sure you do, you need to have a better understanding of context, politics, economics, and you need to engage with questions of power and structure, because a Jesus shorn of all these things is a pretty bland and pointless Jesus.